Trying to find my way, 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 trying to find my way. I'm trying to change me.
My faith is in God alone, beyond a reasonable doubt. This brainstorm, pouring rain on your seeds in the drought. Just trying to lay a couple seeds in the mouth. Thanks for listening. You ever get the feeling you was missing?
What up, y'all? It's your hometown hero, Scott Lane, the Black Bruce Wayne, a.k.a. the real Adam Coleman. So, you're riding with Tru-ID. So, I'm going to try to record this intro real quick. I think I'm losing my voice. So, hopefully I can get a good intro in before that happens. Just got finished teaching at my church, actually, man. It's the first time being able to teach in apologetics, as a lead teacher, anyway, preach a full message at my church. So shout out to Calvary Chapel, man. Thanks for Pastor Clark for giving me a shot at that, man. I taught earlier tonight on the evidence for the resurrection, man, historical evidence for the resurrection. So, people have heard me speak on it, I think, on this show. We did a whole episode on it at No Ceilings. And so I kind of did like a shorter version of that. So for anybody who follows me on Facebook, you can check out that video, man. And I'll probably maybe splice it up and put it on my YouTube channel, man. Trying to get some more YouTube content out there for y'all, man. I've been sleeping on my YouTube channel for a minute. And now I'm trying to, get some more content up there, more videos, because I know people are visual and that kind of stuff, and just get some really good stuff out there. So I dropped 2 videos last week, as a matter of fact, from some events that I've done over the last couple of months. And so I kind of took snippets of that. So definitely go to my YouTube channel and y'all can check out that. I dropped a video on basically addressing an aspect of the problem of evil. And see, the second video I did, I dropped that like a couple of days later. I mean, I probably should space them out a little bit more, but I was just excited, to be honest with you. So I just put it out there. But I did had a video answering the question, will God judge America for slavery? So definitely go to my YouTube channel and check that out. And speaking of the problem of evil and no ceilings, this week, I've got the audio from the part 2 of the series that I'm doing with No Ceilings on, why do bad things happen to good people? It's basically the problem of evil. A couple months ago, I dropped the episode where I gave you the audio, and I actually found a better way to record the audio from No Ceilings. So I'm really excited about that. I think you guys will be able to hear this one, more clearly than we did the last one they aired. But last time we kind of just did an introduction to the problem of evil and the types of considerations that come up. This session here, we get into what's called the logical problem of evil, and we break that down. And so between the first session that we did and now, we've actually done 2 more parts. So I'm going to drop part 2 right now, and then we're going to drop part 3 probably in a couple of weeks, just kind of round out the problem of evil series. So with that being said, man, check out this audio right here. This is from the No Ceilings Bible study in June, where we giving you part 2 out of 3 of the series we're doing on the problem of evil. Why do bad things happen to good people? Love y'all, man. Check it out. Yo. All right, there we go. Test. All right, cool, man. So like I said, I'm going to start with where we were last month, because we're answering a pretty serious question. It's like, why do bad things happen to good people? Is one of the versions of the problem of evil. It's one of the way that people present it. So we definitely want to take our time with it. So last time we talked about we're going to take 3 sessions, this being the second of them, to kind of put some building blocks in place. And then I think next month we'll be able to kind of sum it all up, to where we put the building blocks together into an answer that makes some sense, and kind of help us navigate it a little bit. So what we did was we talked about the difference between the emotional problem of evil and the intellectual problem of evil. That was like our first building block, getting a grasp of that. Because, you don't want to be, somebody comes to you like with the problem of evil, you don't want to necessarily give them the 2 + 2 is 4 answer. You know what I'm saying? Like you want to just, sometimes it's just best just to be there for the person, right? So it's not always necessarily an intellectual thing, but at the same time, the intellectual side of it, has its place, because by answering the intellectual problem of evil, we can kind of give people a safety net that'll keep them within, certain boundaries so that they can then address the emotional side. So we talked about that. The second part, building block we put in place, we talked about how all worldviews have to grapple with this problem. So many times I think Christians, paint themselves in a corner, as if we're the only ones that have to answer tough questions. And that's just not the case. You know what I'm saying? Like any worldview that somebody wants to be taken seriously has to answer the questions that concern, human existence and, how we live and the things that are real in the world. So, when we're talking about the problem of evil, there's nothing wrong with if somebody were to present it to you to, put it back on them as well, have them carry their end of the conversation, and in addition to giving the biblical perspective, also having that person, carry their side of the convo from their worldview and then see how they stack up. So that was our second building block. And then the third building block, we talked about how morality, objective morality, gives us good reason to believe that God exists. We went through that line of reasoning. If there's such thing as if there's such thing as evil, then there must be a such thing as good. If there's good and evil, then there's a moral law. If there's a moral law, there's a moral lawgiver. And the best explanation for a moral lawgiver, I would argue is God, right? So we talked about how morality itself gives us good reason to believe that God exists. So here's kind of where we are in our chain of things. Now, y'all know my handwriting is terrible. So if there's anything you can't necessarily read, we can kind of go over it. So, you have the POE, problem of evil, right here. Sometimes it'll be, people couch it as the problem of suffering. Sometimes they'll use the word suffering rather than evil. We're just kind of being slang with it right now. So we have the problem of evil, kind of breaks off into the emotional side and the intellectual side. And then even when we're dealing with the intellectual problem of evil, there are two major types of arguments that you're going to run into from people when it comes to the intellectual side of the problem of evil. You have the logical argument from the problem of evil, and then you have the probability argument from the problem of evil. Or some people will say the evidential side. So once you break off into the emotional and to the intellect, you still got another breakdown. You got the logical and the probability. So this week, what we're going to do is we're going to cover the logical side. And then next month, we're going to cover the probability argument. And that's going to help us to kind of sum things up, I think. Some of the things that we learn here with the logical argument are going to help us with the probability as well. So we're going to start with that one first. All right? So there we go. That's where we're at right now.
Go.
See, I got the hair clip.
So you said we start with logical probability.
Right. So what we're doing is, originally we started with how there's a difference between the emotional problem of evil and the intellectual side. Today we're focusing on the intellectual side. And there's two types of main arguments that come up when dealing with the intellectual side of the problem of evil. And one of those types is the logical problem of evil. So out of the intellectual issues that come up when it comes to the problem of evil, we're going to be dealing with the logical side. There's a whole different, I don't want to make it seem overly simplistic. I mean, people have been writing about this for thousands upon thousands of years. You know what I'm saying? So, we don't want to make it seem as though it's just, we can sum it all up within an hour or so. But I think we can touch on some things in a way that, if somebody comes to you, you can respond to the problem of evil in a respectable, logical way. Okay.
Have you ever noticed how some people that don't believe in God or whatever, they immediately stay on the emotional side, like what Jordan, they'll be on the emotional side and they'll argue on the emotional side? Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, obviously evil is a real thing. I think most people would agree with that. At very least, they may say suffering is a real thing. You notice that in this argument, the key word here is going to be, or one of the key words is going to be suffering. There's a reason why people use that in the argument instead of evil, but maybe we'll get back to that later. But, whatever it is, we all know that it exists. You know what I'm saying? We all know that it's a problem. And so I think that the emotional problem of evil, it's easier to argue from that because we all feel it. We all feel it. But when you talk about the intellectual side, not everybody has really thought about it. We all feel it, but we haven't necessarily thought it through. And so that's why I think that it's much easier for people many times to just kind of bank on, the emotional side and kind of camp out there. So, for example, in my circle, so to speak, I'm constantly dealing with, people who are like these ex-pastors and things like that online that are, propping up, objecting to Christianity. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to be presenting something that sounds like, or actually is, the emotional problem of evil. I'm thinking about somebody like Kevin Wesley or something like that. He's always going on, like the emotional side of the problem of evil. But, typically they're not going to venture over to the intellectual side and probably aren't aware of it, quite frankly. But, generally they're not going to go that route, because it's so much easier to stay on the emotional side. All right. So let me see, mark where we're at here. Okay. So here we go. So this is with the logical problem of suffering. Now we're going to switch words a little bit. Okay.
we're going to talk about the logical problem of suffering. The reason why we're doing it is I want to basically give you the strongest argument that you're probably going to run into. Because if you can defeat the stronger ones, then it makes it easier to defeat the weaker ones. An atheist who knows what he's talking about will probably use the term suffering here rather than evil. Because remember we talked about last month, if you say that evil exists, then you open yourself up for us to kind of follow that line of reason and say, well, that gives us good reason to believe that there's a God. So rather than concede that evil exists, they'll substitute the word evil for the word suffering. The other side of that is you can actually observe suffering. You can actually observe somebody going through a situation that's, not positive. And so, from an atheist standpoint or just general non-believer, there's something they can point to and they have less burden to prove by turning this word from evil into suffering. So that's kind of why we're addressing that there. We good so far?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what you have here is what's called a deductive argument, a deductive argument. And we're not going to get into all the ins and outs of it. But basically, a deductive argument is a series of statements, at least two, that lead to a conclusion. Okay, so it's going to be a series of statements with the last one being a conclusion that's supposed to follow from the previous statements. Okay, that's the nuts and bolts of what a deductive argument is. Okay, so let's read it. It's logically impossible for God and suffering to exist. That's what you call a premise. That's premise one. Okay, premise two: suffering exists. Therefore, God does not exist. All right. 3 steps, very, very simple. That's your logical problem of suffering, right there. It's logically impossible for God and suffering to exist. Suffering exists, therefore God does not exist.
This is from whose standpoint?
This is from an atheist standpoint. This is what they would want to prove. You know what I'm saying, somebody who doesn't believe in God, they would want to throw this argument at you and say that because. It's logically impossible for both of them. You know what I'm saying? And we'll kind of break that down.
Okay, I'm about to say, why do they think it's impossible for suffering and God?
That's where it's all about. You know what I'm saying? That's where all the argument is. Now, see.
That's not what emotion means.
Well, I mean, there's a couple things going on here. All right. Now, like I said, I'm going to be relying on my notes.
My bad.
No, you're good. You got. I mean, definitely ask questions.
I understand that it's spiritual wise.
Okay.
Talk like that.
Well, there's a couple of things that we need to take a look at. Now that we've seen an argument, like you said, we want to kind of find out why would they think that way. You know what I'm saying? So let's look at that first. Now, let me say before we turn there, is that I think I left a page in my notes. Oh no, here we go. I want to step back for a second to kind of think about how philosophy works. Right now, when you're dealing with argumentation, okay, and really just philosophy in general, it's like a chess game. Okay, if you just step up to a chess game for the first time, you look at the pieces, you don't automatically know how to play the game, right? In order to play the game, you have to understand how the pieces work. Okay, now philosophy is the same way. There's a bunch of different concepts, that philosophers use to come to the conclusions that they come to hopefully come to reasonable conclusions. And those different concepts are like the chess pieces. I'm saying you have to understand how these concepts work in order to apply them to arguments like these and to be able to engage these arguments. So really good philosophers, those are the kinds of people who have spent a long time, learning the concepts and knowing how they work, right? So whereas, let's say, for example, I'll leave it right there for now. Let's look at the concepts, and then we'll come back to that. But that's kind of the mode we're in. We want to know the concepts and how they work, and then once we know that, then we can come back to the argument. All right? Okay. So when it comes to the logical problem of evil, the 3 key concepts is going to be logic, logical inconsistency, and then logical impossibility, which I obviously misspelled. So impossibility, yeah. You know what I'm saying? There you go. Logical impossibility. Okay, so these are the three concepts that we need to understand in order to defeat this argument right here. All right, now what do we mean by logic? Okay, now when people are just kind of walking around, using the term logic, usually what they mean is something along the lines of something that makes sense or something that's rational. That's kind of what they mean by the term logic. All right. But when we're talking about philosophers, they're using a more strict definition of what logic means. It's just like, let's say, for example, if I tell you I feel depressed, all right? If I say, yeah, I feel depressed today, what you think I probably mean is I'm just feeling sad, I'm feeling down a little bit or whatever. Yeah. Now, if I walk into a therapist's office, like some kind of psychologist or something like that, right? And I'm talking to a psychologist and they say, you've got depression. They mean something more specific than just feeling bad. They mean that you have like an actual chemical imbalance, or you have something that's like long-term that needs to be treated. It's not you just feel bad. There's something long-term that's wrong. See, so the therapist is going to use the term depression in a more strict way than most of us use it on the day-to-day. It's the same thing with logic, right? When we use the term logic, we mean just something that's reasonable or makes sense. But philosophers use it in a more strict sense. What they mean is basically the rules and concepts of coming to a reasonable conclusion. That's kind of what they're talking about. You know what I'm saying? Let me read it straight off my paper just so I can say it right, and then we'll kind of go back. But logic, we're talking about the study of reasoning, or the study of the principles and criteria of coming to conclusions and making solid arguments. That's basically what logic is, right? So just like any field of study, you know what I'm saying? Like in the same way that a scientist would go into a lab, and as they're doing their experiments, in some way their experiments are affected by the laws of nature, gravity, so on and so forth. Well, in the same way, when philosophers do their work, their work is guided by these rules of thinking, so to speak. It's like philosophy is like a conversation that's been going on since the beginning of time. And over time, people find that, like, okay, if you want to come to the right conclusion about something, here is a principle that you must follow. And over time, a guideline. Exactly. And so when somebody is saying that, an argument is logical, or an argument, an argument is logical, what they're saying is this argument has followed the standard rules of how we come to conclusions. Right. Okay? Right. And so that's going to be one key component. Are y'all with me so far? Yeah, it's very important. That's important. Very important. Very important. Okay. Now, these next two, I'm going to briefly mention them. And then what I'm going to need to do is to give some analogies, I think, to kind of really make it pop, to really make, have it make sense. Okay. So the next one is a key component. Now, remember, recovering concepts that we need to understand in order to give a reasonable answer to the atheist objection to evil, to suffering, from that. All right. So that's number one. Number two, logical inconsistency. Logical inconsistency. Okay. Now, logical inconsistency applies when you have a number of different statements, and you're looking at a set of statements. It has to be at least two, but as two or more statements, and the way that they're worded, not all of them can be true. Some of them might be true, but they can't all be true at the same time. That's what you're talking about. They're not consistent with one another. Let's take a look at that for a second, all right? This is going to be the key for us to understanding why they think the way they think about, this logical problem of evil, this second one. So we'll come back to it. Now I'm going to go to my analogy. All right. Let's go to the box. All right. Now, in this box, I've got one item. Okay? And we're going to take these two statements. We're not going to worry about the bottom part yet. We're going to take these two statements, the A and the B, and we're going to apply them to the item that's in this box. All right. Statement A is the item in this box is made entirely of plastic. The item in this box is made entirely of plastic. Statement B, the item in this box is made entirely of marshmallows. Okay? Now, here's my question. Can both A and B be true?
Yeah. No.
Why do you say no? Let's think about it. The item in this box is made entirely of plastic. All right? B, the item in this box is made entirely of marshmallows. Is it possible for both of these statements to be true about this one item in the box?
Yes.
Okay. You don't think so?
It could be like a fake marshmallow.
It could be, all right, but an actual marshmallow. For the sake of argument, like it's an actual marshmallow. You know what I'm saying? And an actual piece, something that's actually made of plastic, like literally. It's inconsistent, right?
What we know about marshmallows, what they are, what they look like.
Thank you. From what we know about marshmallows. Now here's the thing. There you go. From what we know, right? Now here's the key word here. Entirely. Right? That's one of the key words anyway.
Yeah.
Because it could be that this one item is made partly out of marshmallows or made partly out of plastic. That'd be kind of weird, but it's possible. But it can't be entirely one and entirely the other. Okay? These two statements are logically inconsistent.
Correct.
They can't both be true.
Correct.
Or real. Right?
If they were partly, they'll cancel each other out.
What's that?
If they were partly, they'll cancel each other out.
Yeah, if they were partly, then both of these statements would be false. If the item is partly one, and partly the other. Because both of these statements have the word entirely in it. So if it's partly one and partly the other, then neither of these statements is true. Right. But one thing we do know is that they can't both be true in the same way at the same time. All right, now let's take a look at the item in the box and see where this leads us. So here's the item in the box.
right? So, based on these two statements, right, the item in this box is made entirely of plastic, and B, the item in this box is made entirely of marshmallows. Now that we see what's actually in the box, what can we do when we go back to these statements? We can cross one of them out, right?
Cross B out.
You know what I'm saying? Given the fact that we know that it's entirely of plastic, we can X this out as a possibility. It's impossible for it to be this because we know that it's that. All right. Now, let's go back to our argument and see what atheists are saying. In the same way, oh wait, excuse me. Right. Oh, you know what? I think I did it on the next page. Or did I? Okay. Hold on. Okay. No. All right. Yeah. Let's go back to the argument. Okay. So with that in mind, right? Let's go back to the argument. All right. Now let's make God our A now. Let's say he's the A statement. All right. I should have wrote it out. Okay. Let's say this is like our B. All right. Now, in the same way that this item in the box cannot be entirely plastic and entirely made of marshmallows, what the atheist is saying is it's impossible for God to be in existence in reality and for suffering to be in existence in reality.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But in the same way. What's that?
That's marshmallows and plastic for them.
Exactly. It's like marshmallows and plastic. It can't be both. They can't both be in reality. But in the same way that once we took this out of the plastic and we knew that it was plastic and we could mark out the other one, what they're saying is, well, we know that suffering exists because we observe it. And so therefore, we can mark out God. Therefore, God does not exist. That's what they're saying.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So it's all about basically, if I were to make a statement that God exists and suffering exists, they're saying that those are logically inconsistent.
Right.
But we know this, therefore we X God out of the picture. That's where their thinking is coming from. See, that's why it's important that we know the concept that they're applying, because now our job is to question that, to push back and say, well, is it actually the case that it's logically impossible for there to be a God and for there to be...
and this is where most people get stuck at.
This is where most people get stuck at.
They don't get it.
Right. Exactly. That's the question. How can there be the case? Now, so I kind of did a little...
That was good.
Yeah, we're going to... Yeah, well, they're saying that it's got to be one or the other.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And you could, so one would say, well, look, I can't see God. I can't, they kind of go into that kind of rant, but I see suffering. Well, I mean, if I was gonna be an atheist, I would say it's not that I made the logic to fit my reasoning. Is that my reasoning helped me to discover that it's not logical that God exists. That's what they would say. If I was going to make that, if they were going to make that argument. All right, now. So remember, we talked about the key concepts, right? So we understand how they're applying logical inconsistency. We talked about logic, we talked about logical inconsistency, and then we talked about logical impossibility. And each of these concepts are not only going to be good for this argument, but really any argument that you deal with, in philosophy, or just any philosophical issue. These are the types of things that are going to come into play, right? So now let's talk about logical impossibility, all right? Now I said before that logical inconsistency deals with two or more statements, right? They had the A and the B, or it could be C, D, F to Z, whatever it may be. But you have to have at least two statements, all right? Logical impossibility is going to deal with, you're dealing with one statement. You're saying that one statement contradicts itself, basically. It can't be the case, right? And so that's what they're saying is that, okay, we, again, either God exists or suffering, or suffering exists. We know suffering exists, therefore God doesn't exist. If we were to draw it out, it kind of looks like this. So they're saying it could be the case that God and evil are in two separate worlds. They could say, all right, maybe that's the case, but they're saying that it cannot be the case that God and evil are in the same world. That's what they're really saying. I'm saying that it's logically impossible for God and evil to be in the same world, in the same reality, I guess you could say. All right. And so what they're saying is, it's kind of like, back in the day, remember those old cowboy movies where they'd be like, there's not enough room in this town for the both of us. You see what I'm saying? It's the same concept. There's not enough room in this town, this reality that we live in, for God and evil. That's what they're really saying, okay? But what we want to show is, no, actually it is the case that it could be that God and evil, it's possible for them to be in the same town, in the same reality. So that's where we want to push the conversation to. Are we good so far? I'm going to kind of pause for questions.
No, we're good.
Everything good? Yeah, we want to move it towards the conclusion that actually it is possible
for God and evil to be within the same reality at the same time. I'm saying it's not logically impossible. We don't have to cast out one or the other, basically. Right. All right. I should have made that an S for suffering, but be a little sloppy here. All right. Okay. So those are the key concepts that we're going to need. Let me mark where I'm at here. So now the next question is, now that we know how they're thinking, now that we know what's the driving force behind, this argument, now we want to push back. How are we going to form our attack? What are we going to do? Okay. Let's go back to it. All right. Now, I want to use an analogy of a car. I should have drew a car on here. I'm just there you go. I guess it's like a hatchback or something like that. A foam finger. Right. So, all right. So, anytime you deal with a philosophical argument, I want you to think of it as being like a car. There's different ways that you can plot out your plan of attack. All right. Now, one of those things that you can do is kind of like if you were a mechanic. Say somebody drives in with a car and says, my car is sounding funny, right? What would you want to do? You want to open the hood. You might have to break down the engine, to really find out where the problem is. It's the same way with a philosophical argument. What we want to do is we want to take the pieces apart and then look at them individually, if possible, and then find out where the problem is, and then we want to point the objector to the problem and show how the argument fails. All right. Now here's how we're going to do it. We're going to open the hood of the argument, right? Yeah. Now, like I said, I think I said it before. In this argument, nobody would really disagree that suffering exists. I mean, that's just common sense. You know what I'm saying? The only worldview that might disagree would be something like some form of pantheism, like Hinduism or something like that. They would say that maybe suffering is not real, it's just all an illusion or something like that. But, just keeping the conversation between atheists and Christians, both sides would agree that there's really suffering in the world. Bad things are really going on, right? Things that people don't like are really happening, whether it be wars and, people being separated from their families at the border, whatever it may be. Suffering exists. So this really here is not controversial. That's not where we want to form our plan of attack. Because in order to beat this one, you'd have to say that, oh, no, suffering doesn't exist. And that's too hard of a hill to climb. It doesn't make sense to do that. Yeah. Secondly, the Bible actually affirms that suffering exists. So in order for us to say that suffering does not exist, we'd have to cut against our own belief system to do so. Yeah. So that's not rational. We don't want to go that route. So here's where all the action is. All the action in this argument is in that first premise. That's where we want to focus our plan of attack. Now, in order for the atheist, or whatever non-believer, to make a case for this first premise, I'm saying they're going to have to make at least two assumptions. They're going to make at least two assumptions. So when we open up the hood of this argument, like I said, this argument is kind of like a car. We open up the hood, we find that the engine driving this hood are these two assumptions. All right, let's just read them out right quick. So assumption number one is if God is all powerful, he can create any world that he wants. That's assumption number one. Yeah. Number two, if God is all loving, he prefers a world without suffering, right? Now, these are the assumptions that the atheist is going to make. Yeah. Now, the key, we're going to go back again to the actual premise. This word right here is so important, all right? And it filters into these two assumptions because basically what they have, in order for this argument to work, these assumptions have to be correct no matter what. Like there's no possible way that these two assumptions are false. If we can show that not false, but if we can show that either of these two assumptions, could possibly be false, then the whole argument fails. We don't even have to prove that the assumption is false. All we have to show is that it's possible. Because again, they're holding themselves to a standard of impossibility. They're saying it's impossible. There's no way that these two assumptions and this premise are wrong. So once we prove that it's possible, it all crashes. It's like we've taken the engine out of the car. Yeah. Now let me use an analogy. So it's like when you think about these cases, I should have drawn it. Well, let's say here. All right. Let's say this is a glass, right? You got two glasses. All right. Now think about these cases where young men are being shot, by the police or something like that. You have some cases where the officer will go to court and they'll be acquitted if they go to court at all. They'll be acquitted, from the criminal charge, But then months later, you find out, that they go to civil court and they have to pay out, millions of dollars, or, the city where they're at pays out millions of dollars in the civil case, right? Well, in a criminal case, the standard of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm saying, we've all heard that term, beyond a reasonable doubt. You can't just convict somebody because you think, they did it. It's got to be just almost certain. That's the standard of proof when it comes to criminal court, right? In a civil court, it's far less. All you have to show is that it's more likely than not that the person did some wrong. I'm saying there's more evidence than not that the person did wrong. So it's two different standards of evidence. Now, with this argument, by using terms like impossible, the atheist has pretty much committed themselves to a burden of proof that's similar to the criminal case, right? That's basically what they've done. They've set a high bar for themselves, right? So all we have to do is introduce a reasonable doubt. Right. That's all we got to do. I'm saying, and we do that by showing that these two assumptions are not necessarily true. All right. So again, I'm gonna read the assumptions, and then we're gonna go into each one and show why they may not be the case. All right. All right. So again, if God is all powerful, he can create any world that he wants. If God is all loving, then he prefers a world without suffering. Now on the surface, that sounds right, doesn't it? Well, let's take a closer look. All right. All right. I'm entering into Calvinist hate me territory with this next part, but hopefully they'll stay tuned, because I'm gonna give them a little something they can work with too, that everybody can agree with, right? We can all get along. All right, so let's take a look at this this first assumption. I just called it A1 and A2, but that's from the last page. Okay, so A1, he can create a world. He can create any world that he wants. Okay, is that necessarily true? Right now, I use the term again. Necessarily, that's another one of those words that a philosopher will use in a more strict sense than we do generally speaking, or a more intentional sense, right? So what I'm saying is it necessarily true, or could it be the case that something else is possible? I'm saying it is possible, that something else could be possible than just the assumption that they've made, all right? Why would I say that? First, it's important to understand when we talk about God's omnipotence, right? When we talk about he can create, what can God do? Let's talk about omnipotence. We can go through a lot of different ways why this is true, but basically the correct understanding of God's omnipotence is that he can do anything that is logically possible. Remember we talked about, logical impossibility before. So, we wouldn't say that God can do things that are logically impossible. Now, why is that? Because essentially things that are logically impossible don't exist and cannot exist, right? So, for example, is it possible to have a square with 3 sides and 3 angles? Right, it's impossible, right? If I told you, hey man, go out throughout Richmond and find me a dog with 3 legs, you could possibly find a dog with 3 legs. Maybe one that had it amputated or something like that. That's possible. But if I told you, let's say if you find me one, I'm gonna give you $1 million. You would dip out and be like, yo, I'm gonna find me a dog with 3 legs, right? Yeah. But if I told you, go out and find me a square that has 3 sides and 3 angles somewhere in Richmond, you wouldn't leave your seat. There would be no need to, because it doesn't exist. There's no reason for you to waste your time talking from that we all know cannot possibly exist. Based on what a square is by definition, and based on what a triangle is by definition, you can't have a square that has 3 angles and 3 sides. You see what I'm saying? It's logically impossible, right? So that's why we would say, God can do anything that's logically possible. But, the square circle, it can't exist. So it's not possible for him to create that. It's just gibberish. To say something is a square circle is just nonsense. It's gibberish, So that's important, there, right there. Now, let's apply that to our assumption number 1. Again, the assumption is he can create any world that he wants. Well, what if God wants a world in which creatures have quote unquote free will? That's the word that I know many Calvinists don't like, but I'll explain that further in a second as to why they shouldn't cringe at that moment, right? Free will. So, what if God wants to create a world with free will? Now, let me ask you this: if God wants to create a world where everybody has free will, is it possible to create a world in which everyone is forced to freely do the right thing all the time? Think about it.
That don't make any sense.
It doesn't make sense. Why doesn't it make sense?
Forced and freely don't go together.
Forced and free don't go there. Exactly. If it's forced, it's not free.
Right.
And if it's free, it's not entirely forced. You see what I'm saying? I should say entirely, right? So just to make sure I'm splitting hairs here. So again, for God to create a world in which everybody freely is forced to freely do the right thing, right? That would be like saying God can create a square or circle, or, again, a square with 3 angles and 3 sides. It's just gibberish. It's not possible, right? So therefore, if God desires to create a world in which there's free will, then he might want a world in which there's no evil. He might want that. I mean, I'm sure he probably does, but it's just not possible to have no evil in a world where there's free will, because it could be the case. It's possible that given free will, there will always be somebody who's going to bite that apple one way or the other, whether it be Adam, Eve, or some descendant. Somebody going to screw it up.
As long as there's free will.
As long as it's free will. It's just the law of I guess
law of free will.
Averages or probabilities or something like that. Somebody's going to screw it up eventually. That's why it's funny when people say, like, oh man, if I was in the garden, I wouldn't have ate the apple. I mean, yeah, you probably would eventually. After about 4,000 years of existence, you probably be like, let me give it a shot. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, so if God wants a world in which there's free will, right, then it's likely not possible that he can create that world without allowing for some level of evil, for allowing for people to make bad choices. Okay. Now the other question is, well, wait a minute. Does God have morally? Does God have enough moral reason? Would a good God have enough moral reason to create that world anyway, even though there's going to be some evil going on? Well, I would say yes. Here's the reason why. Love. Most philosophies, most religions or whatever, they're going to esteem love as being the highest ethic. I'm saying we all, value love, right? And when you think about it, I said this in a recent, I was speaking at North Carolina. Shout out to the Mentionables, by the way. In response to a question, I said that, love is more valuable than perfection. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And anybody who's married would agree with that. I'm saying anybody who has children would agree with that. You know what I'm saying? Anybody who has a dog would agree with that. Last night I'm sitting here studying, getting ready for this, and my dog walks in after having chewed up a poopy diaper for my son and stinks up the whole room. I don't kill the dog. I love the dog. You know what I'm saying? It's worth having the dog even though she screws up. You know what I'm saying? My wife, I was jokingly said before, I'm sure I got dirty drawers, laying somewhere around the house right now, but my wife still loves me with my imperfections and all, right? Because love is more valuable than perfection. We all know that. So likewise with God, I'm saying, even knowing that there's going to be a possibility and likelihood that these free will creatures are going to commit evil, in the same way that we know that our kids are going to disappoint us and we have kids anyway. You know what I'm saying? Because love is worth it. For God, love is worth it. You know what I'm saying? And not only that, it's worth it for us. Because whatever evil we encounter in this life, if it really is the case, I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit. If it really is the case that there's an all-loving God, all-perfect God that we're going to enjoy for eternity, then whatever evil we experience here is going to be outweighed by the eternity of good that we get to experience later on. It's just like what Paul says. He makes that argument. He says that the struggles we're going through now, I'm paraphrasing, are working for us a far, far heavier weight of glory in eternity. Now the question is, do we take eternity seriously? But we'll get to that another time. So here's the thing. So again, if it is possible that if it's impossible for there to be a world with free will, I'm sorry, I messed it up. Let me backtrack for a second. Dealing with our assumption, right? It's possible that God wanted a world with free will, because in free will you can have genuine love. That's the part I forgot to mention. If you don't have free will, how can you have love? I'm saying, how can you have real love? I'm saying, if everybody's just a robot, I'm saying, then that's not real love. That's at best like kind of a puppet show in which God kind of, just kind of Pinocchios us around as if it was real love. But that's not real love. Now, a moral God, a God who is love, would prefer real love over fake love. I'm saying, so therefore he would prefer a world of free will in which love is actually possible over this robotic world. You know what I'm saying? That's one side of it. Now, with that being said, there's a lot of debate, not just among Calvinists, but let's just say theologically, there's a lot of debate about free will, whether we have it or not, if so, what kind. Even in the atheist circles, the question, comes up, do we actually have free will? But that's a different type of discussion. But I just want to, deal with, Calvinists right here for a second. They would probably cringe at me just kind of using the term free will without qualifiers as to what I mean. Now, for, I'm being a little bit technical here, but even compatibilists, they would say that we have enough free will in order to make a range of choices that are within our nature. You know what I'm saying? That's what a compatibilist would say. Well, even if we have that level of free will, it still satisfies this number 2 here, which debunks the assumption. I'm saying, so you can be a Calvinist and still affirm what they might call limited libertarian free will or the compatibilist understanding of free will, and it's still going to debunk, this that in of itself is still going to debunk this first assumption either way. But I want to go back to a second. Remember, all we have to do to defeat this argument is demonstrate that it's possible, that something other than this assumption is correct, if it's even possible. So a Calvinist could say everything that I just said about love, free will. They could affirm, or they could, use the most free type of free will imaginable, just to say that it's possible, that we have this broad sense of free will. I don't necessarily believe it, but it's logically possible. And saying as long as I put it on the table, it's logically possible, even if after my Calvinist doesn't believe it, it still defeats his argument, because all we care about here is defeating that impossibility. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So that's the first assumption. We talked about omnipotence. We talked about, what that means. We talked about, what if God wants a world with free will, how we, can't have a world where people are forced to freely do everything right. And we talked about why he might want a world with free will, because in such a world, you're free. You can exercise your will by which you can then engage in real love rather than some kind of puppeteering type of love. So the first assumption, if it's even possible that we have free will, if that's even possible that God would allow for that, this first assumption fails. It's done. I'm saying it's because it's no longer necessarily true. Right, it's no longer true, and nothing else can be true because we introduced another possibility. And so this assumption is done. So now let's go to the second one. All right.
Hold on.
Yeah.
So they say something like, you said something about love. They'd be like, you said it cancels out. He can create any type of world he wants. It cancels that out.
No. I'm saying that if we have a God who wants us to have free will, because in having free will, we are then enabled to engage with him and with one another. I mean, think about the greatest two commandments, to love God and love people, right? Those are the greatest two commandments. If God wants such a world in which Jesus' two commandments, two top commandments are in effect, that we're loving God and loving people, then it's very possible, and I would say it is the case, that, he allows for free will, because if you're not free to make choices or not free to willfully love God, then that kind of love is more robotic rather than authentic, I guess you could say. Now, if it's even possible that God desires real love with mankind and love between each other, if that's even possible, and therefore he allows for free will, if that's even possible, then the atheist's first assumption or the objective's first assumption falls to pieces, because now you have a world in which there's free will, but you can't have the free will without the possibility of evil. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So the first assumption is done. All right. The second one, a loving God will create. Remember, I want to say, let's see where we at. How did I say it the first time? Okay. Our second assumption, remember, just because it's been a while, I want to make sure I show it again. If God is all loving, he prefers a world without suffering. Now, is this statement true? And no other thing but that can be true. Like, is it possible that this is not the case? That, a loving God, or put it this way, is it possible for a loving God to allow a world in which there is suffering? Well, we already said it's possible, because he may want love, and love requires free will. And if it requires free will, then that allows for evil. So we already know that that's possible. But then on top of that, it could be the case that God allows a certain level of evil for some greater good that's unbeknownst to us. That's possible. Now, here's an interesting point, especially when you're dealing with people online, like your Facebook ex-pastor types, or just, typically people online. There are certain common sense statements, that Christians make that these online, conscious woke folks will say, oh, no, that's bull crap. You know what I'm saying? That's what y'all Christians always say. You know what I'm saying? One of those would be that God works in mysterious ways. You know what I'm saying? Like you often hear some of these folks say, oh, see, there y'all go, y'all Christians. Anytime you have a problem, you always say God works in mysterious ways. And they say it in such a way as if this isn't a legitimate statement, right? However, when you start digging into philosophy and we start understanding how professional thinkers think, the idea that there are some things that we actually cannot know, that there are some things that if there is a God, whether they're atheists or not, the idea that this, God would be a certain way and do certain things in such a way that we can't actually know it, that's a reasonable thing to say. You know what I'm saying? Among actual thinkers. You see what I'm saying? Now, again, like I said, if you're just talking with the average person on the street, like, oh, no, that's bullcrap. But no, it actually is the case that God works in mysterious ways. And when you think about it, if there's this infinite being out there somewhere that is omniscient, it makes a whole lot of sense that he would know things that we cannot know, or at least don't know, that we can't fathom without him explaining to us first, right? Now, so I just kind of said this. Sometimes common sense and the deeper end of philosophy intersect in ways that maybe the average objector to Christianity doesn't appreciate. And so we kind of have to call them out on that sometimes. All right, so at the end of the day, what the atheists would have to say that it is impossible for God to allow certain levels of evil, for some greater good. Now think about it. Back in March, I think I didn't make it out here in March, and one of the reasons I had something going on with my son. So my son's sitting at the crib. I'm at work. I get a text message. My wife sends me a picture of my son had this gash in his hand. The dog bit him. Got him pretty bad. Yeah, our dog. Yeah, bit him pretty bad. Now my son, and my son is 3, and he antagonizes the dog. He pulls on his tail, kicks, does dumb stuff when we're not looking. And so, no, I'm sure he had a reason. I'm sure. Now, obviously, we're still going to get rid of the dog just for safety's sake because we got a 1-year-old. But that's neither here nor there. So, the dog bites my son. He's got this terrible gash. We put hydrogen peroxide on, all this kind of stuff. But it's pretty deep. Now, the next day rolls around, and my son's hand is not only puffy, it's swelled up because of the pressure of the bite, but it's still pretty puffy. It hasn't gone down at all. And we're starting to notice like some weird discoloration, even kind of going down his arm. What does that mean? He's got an infection. That's what that means. I'm saying when you see that streak kind of coming down the arm, that means that now this hand is infected, right? So I had to take my son to the doctor. They're like, "Oh, you need to get to the ER like ASAP. Like you can't even deal with. Like you need to go to the ER." So we end up taking him to the ER. Long story short, my son ends up having to get intravenous IV for antibiotics to kill the infection. You know what I'm saying? Now, when I tell you, being in that ER and having to hold my son down while he's just bawling, crying for just as hard as he ever has, while they put this needle in his arm, is the hardest thing I've ever had to do as a father. With like hands down. You know what I'm saying? Like I had to actually hold my son. He's looking me in the eye, wondering. He doesn't understand what's going on. He's 3, and he's wondering, like, Dad, why are you allowing them to put this needle in my arm? Sure. But I know that if I don't allow this level of pain, that this infection is going to kill him. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? So I had morally sufficient reasons. I had good reasons for allowing my son to endure that suffering. Right? Now, let's get back to this. Is it possible? Is it at least possible that God knows something about human nature, and maybe he knows something about sin, maybe he knows something about how we are, just reality? Is it even possible that he would allow certain levels of evil for some greater good? Definitely. Of course it is. No question. It's at least possible, right? And that's all I need. All I need is that one. All I need is a what if. In order to defeat, their statement about these assumptions of impossibility, all I need is a what if. You know what I'm saying? What if God, allows certain levels of evil for some greater good? Now, here's the thing. If it's possible, then assumption 2 is gone. It's gotta be gone. Gone. Yeah. Right? In order for the atheist or whatever objector to come back at me now, they've got the burden of proof. They've got to prove to me that it is completely impossible for God to allow evil for some measure of good. And you can't do it. It's impossible for them to do that. Right. You know what I'm saying? Now, for those reasons. Now, let me go back for a second. All right. Okay. Actually, that's my last page. Oh yeah, he's good. Yeah, he's good now, man. He's back to breaking stuff around the house, running around, being rambunctious. He a soldier, man. But every now and again, it was like 3 months ago. And every now and again, he'll still tell me that he hates the dog. I don't like Socket. I hate him. It's like dog. It was how long ago? So, I don't know. Maybe I'll teach him about forgiveness, walking in forgiveness towards the dog or something. I don't know. Okay, so now, okay, right. So they're saying it's logically impossible for God and suffering to exist. When we open the hood of the car, we find that it relies upon the engine of these 2 assumptions that have to be true and impossibly false in order for this first premise to work, right? Remember, this is where all the action is, right? We opened up the hood, and now we're dealing with these 2, and what we found was actually that it is possible, that there's a possibility here that goes against this first assumption, and this one's done. We can cross that out because it's possible that God allows a world in which there's free will, because you have to have free will in order for there to be real love. Yeah. But by allowing free will, you have to allow for certain level of evil. That's at least possible, and so this first assumption is done. Also, the second assumption, we just said that it's possible that God could allow suffering for some greater good. So now the second assumption is done. Well, if the first assumption is done, and the second assumption is done, and that's what's propping up premise one, we can now cross out premise one. We can say that it's not impossible for God and suffering to exist in the same world. It's not impossible because we just gave you two possibilities. You see what I'm saying? And so if this first premise is gone, the whole argument fails. It's a wrap. Because now all you have left is the second premise. We don't care about the second premise because we agree with that.
Right.
But without the first, this whole argument fails. Now, here's the thing. In order for the atheists to try to save the argument, here's what they have. Remember, we're talking about like the criminal system, how they've got the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
They would have to say that it is impossible that we have free will, and it is impossible that God could allow evil for some greater good. And you can't. There's no possible way that we can know that. There's no possible way that you have this overwhelming knowledge of future and past events and the present, such that you can conclusively say that it's impossible that God allowed X, Y, Z, for some greater good. In order for you to say that, you would actually have to be God. You'd have to be omniscient or close to it in order to even make that statement, which no atheist can. Now, for that reason, like I said, going back, there's two main branches of the intellectual problem of evil. We're dealing with the logical side, and next time we'll deal with the probability side. But if you could imagine the field of philosophy being like one big conversation, you know what I'm saying, among philosophers where they hash out different issues and some ideas gain more traction than others, this logical problem of evil is a problem of suffering is considered to be out of date. Like hardly nobody rocks with this joint anymore. It had a good run. It had a real good run. Yeah. But given the types of defenses that I've laid out today, now everybody's just like, that joint, it doesn't work. So your main attention has now been shifted over to the other type, which we'll get to next time. But this one here, in popular stuff, you'll find it. And by popular, I mean, so for example,
Probably Zacharias uses it all the time.
well, he's not going to use this argument, but he'll refer to it, right? Yeah, yeah. This has become an atheist, and I didn't know it, but But I'll give you an example. So if anybody saw the Batman vs. Superman movie, which was a horrible movie. If you haven't seen it, don't see it. But it was terrible. But if you've seen that movie, the Batman vs. Superman, Lex Luthor makes a statement when he's talking to, I want to say he was talking to Superman at the time. And he just says it real quick. He's about to get on a helicopter. He said, if God is all good, then he can't be all powerful. And he kind of does this whole thing, and he jumps off in the plane and dips out. Well, I'm saying it wrong now, but basically he was just doing. They just threw the problem of evil in there real quick, and then he dipped out. You know what I'm saying? But so anyway, you'll find this version of the problem of evil among your ex-pastor types or in movies and things like that. But among professional philosophers, among people who get paid to think through hard problems, among them, they don't respect this particular argument. It's just basically like, that joint is done. You know what I'm saying? They got to move on to something else, which is the probability version. I think that I covered everything.
You're about done.
Yeah, you're about done. So like I said, next time we'll deal with the probability version. I think the thing to remember is, I want to say this in a specific way. I might save it till next time. Actually, I'll say that till next time because it'll fit in. But, we've been talking about the building blocks. We went over the ones we went over last time. The reason why we're tackling this is because not only do we have to know how to defang these arguments, but we also have to make sure that we're equipped to fend off arguments when they do come. And some of these concepts, like the philosophical ones, that are going to be helpful to us when we sum everything up, put a bow on it, and try to give a reasonable response for evil.
Woo.
There you go.
Bro.
There you go, man.
That was worth it, man. That was worth it.
Word, for real, bro?
Yeah, bro.
It made sense? Okay, cool.
Yeah, heck yeah.
Cool,
I'm ready to go to
man.
Battlefield now.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And there it is, man. So y'all know how we do. I felt pretty good about that session. Man. We covered a lot of ground right there. Got a lot of great feedback from it. So I hope that it blessed you guys, my podcast listeners as well. I'm definitely try to, get as much of the audio as I can from the No Ceilings Bible studies, because we cover a lot of great stuff, and I want y'all to be able to experience it as well. With that being said, man, I love you guys, man. For all my listeners out there, definitely check us out, whether it be on the Tru-ID page, it's Tru-ID podcast.com. We've updated it a little bit to where we got a listing of all the different outlets that our podcast is available on. Definitely check us out on iTunes. listen to us, leave a comment, give us 5 stars, and, pass the word on about what we're doing here, man. In addition to that, like I said earlier in this podcast, check us out at the YouTube channel. We're starting to put videos up, so that'll be more engaging and whatnot. And, if you feel led, man, definitely check me out at patreon.com/Adam Coleman. I'm trying to make some moves here, expand the ministry a little bit, do some things that it would be greatly appreciated if I could get some help with it. So definitely check us out at patreon.com/Adam Coleman, and just, be prayerful about supporting the ministry, man. We're really trying to do some big things, including the book that I'm working on that'll require some things. So I definitely appreciate the help. But with that being said, man, I love you guys. Thanks for riding along with me. Appreciate all the feedback. And there's another episode in the books. Peace.